Welcome to Buy It on BirchStreet, the show where we highlight the best of hospitality procurement software, the people behind the solutions, and how they save you valuable money and time. I'm your host, Gareth Fraser. Our guest today is seasoned cybersecurity leader, Rod Kaleho. Welcome to the show, Rod.
Thank you, Gareth. I appreciate it.
For our listeners' benefit, Rod and I have known each other for about 20 years and worked together in various capacities and at various companies. So it's great to be able to have him here to share his thoughts with you about cybersecurity and its impacts upon hospitality today. Let's begin by you sharing your professional background and what attracted you to cybersecurity.
So I spent my entire life in IT and probably the last approximate 20 years in security in one way or another. So a lot of those, or most of that time, was working for Fortune 500 companies, with probably my longest stint anywhere being working for a government contractor doing work for the DoD. But in the last few years, have been focusing on identity and access management in particular, but overall lead cybersecurity teams and work to mature their programs. And as of late, focusing on integration, automation, and analytics, because those probably that triad are, I think, what will help the security industry move forward, probably more than any other thing. And you asked, what got me into it. Probably, I think right around the same time, a friend of mine was working for a risk management arm of one of the, I think, big, top 8 accounting firms at the time, and sharing some stories, and had a CD that you put into someone's computer. It bypassed screensaver, lockout, different things like that, and made the desktop available. So between that and then the organization where I was working at the time, there's a guy that they came in to brought in as a consultant, and he was walking around at that time in a normal office attire, business casual, but he was walking around in white t-shirt, jeans, and his socks everywhere, doing this security work. So not that I necessarily wanted that to be my end state apparel, but some interest there, and then I think a couple things fell into line for me to jump into that, where I was working for the General Dynamics, and we won a major contract to redesign the Air Force network. And then right about the same time, I got accepted to my Master's of Information Assurance program. So a lot of things lined up and fell into place to go to kind of pivot from other things IT to all security, deep security. So it's been a little bit of a journey, but a lot of good experiences along the way.
In a globally connected world, security is obviously of paramount importance. That's fundamental. And reminds me, Rod, of the company you and I were working together for before I came to BirchStreet, one of the largest companies in the United States, which was whitelisted during the COVID pandemic. There were so many learnings to come from that, from a whole variety of different angles, whether it was labor, supply chain, health. The hospitality industry, as we know, is rebounding from that total shutdown. And the 2-year pandemic taught us many lessons, particularly in planning for cybersecurity incidents. Is there a specific area you've experienced that companies need to address?
Ransomware it's funny because back in the master's program that I mentioned, that was back in 2004, 2005, and ransom was something that we discovered. It really probably isolated cases then, but it certainly wasn't mainstream as it is now. But now you have organizations being ransomed, their data being held captive, and then the secondary threat of their information being released publicly as a second or additional incentive to pay the ransom. So that's increasing significantly year over year, and I'd say between IT and security, there's some really good solutions out there, but a lot of organizations still somehow succumb to that because I'd say the primary vector where they're attacked is through phishing emails. So organizations are still training considerably on that, but yet it's still not effective. So that's the biggest. That's the not just in the hospitality industry, but across the board, ransomware is the biggest vector. There's some things that we can do to protect ourselves better. I mentioned the phishing security awareness around that, but there's other things that organizations can do to minimize that blast radius. So we know the most probable areas are our end users that will become infected, or click on something that they're sent in email, and then that starts off a series of events that cascades through the network and encrypts the data. So the blast radius is how far that goes. So the better organizations do in logically segmenting that user population from their most important data, their data that they deem sensitive enough to not want disclosed publicly, are some of the things that they can do there. And there's a lot of different mechanisms to do that, but that is say that's probably the biggest security threat that they face. And when looking at hospitality, has worked really hard to on the operational side of their house, the business to build redundancy there, to find new ways of meeting needs and different things like that. So really need to apply, I think, is an opportunity to apply some of those lessons learned now that we're coming out of COVID, and I think really getting back to levels that were equivalent or maybe even higher before COVID, to take those lessons and start applying those to some of the technology pieces that we have.
Business continuity planning is something that's been neglected by many companies for a long time, Rod. In a world where competition for our attention and resources is even more challenged, we often don't make it to the areas in life that are not urgent, but nevertheless they're important. So can you please speak to the value and importance and fundamental addressing of business continuity planning for not just hospitality business, but for business in general?
It's one of those, BCP is one of those things that often our, attention, our energies, and our daily business needs are diverted towards maybe more urgent things at the time. And if you look at Covey's time management quadrants, there's urgent and important, and it breaks down to the combinations of those. I think we spend a lot of time just in the urgent, important, and then not so much in just the important, where that's where more strategy, some of these things lie. And I would probably put BCP in that area where we don't, there's DR and high availability, and a lot of these things play together, but BCP just there's a lot of rigor necessary around it, and too often companies or organizations just get so focused on what's right in front of them, and that urgent important, and we don't make time for that. So for example, in the past have done BCP drills or even tabletops where you can structure it a few different ways, but sit around a table, bring a group of various and varied stakeholders to the table, including those from IT, but even corporate communications and different ones, so that there's a good variety of representation, and walk through what would happen if this supplier were attacked, if your web presence were taken offline, or ransomware attack. I'll walk through a lot of these, and there's a lot of different scenarios, obviously, but walk through a few. But too many organizations don't put the I'd say quarterly, biannually, or annual rigor into doing that. and that's where a lot of them get, I'd say, caught off guard a bit. So, and there's always good takeaways from that. And then, the more that organizations do that, the deeper that they're able to realize or investigate some of the specifics into those things as they go. So that's really important. Oftentimes what we find is that BCP plans, did get some attention at some point in the past, but they're probably stale. They haven't kept pace with the change of the organization from a technology stack perspective or process perspective. So, different things change like that. Even storage locations for some of the plans, et cetera. So, we just need a lot of good rigor and detail for good BCP that just most organizations don't keep pace with.
Now, we know COVID forced change in many areas, and particularly in technology, identity, as you referred to, and follow on from our conversation just now about business continuity planning. Can you share with the listeners how COVID forced changes and in what specific areas are top of mind for you?
I don't remember the specific tweet or post, but there was kind of a joke that who's been the most successful at driving change. CIO, it named different ones within an organization. Finally, the last option D or whatever was COVID, and that was something that I to that point in my life, I don't think I've ever seen anything that forced, all hands on deck just about everywhere to, to evaluate how services were delivered, who could connect from where, what that meant for internet circuits and different things like that. So, it did force more services online. It forced the rapid adoption of, SaaS usage, which was already being done, at a really good pace, but that increased it even more. We saw, regional workforce impacts where, just like you said, there's different pockets or enclaves of people in society that were impacted more at different times, and that that had a certain impact as well. I think if we look at can look forward and take some lessons from what we saw, that there were that fast reaction, and there were good comments that, wow, we made a lot of significant changes quickly. This is great, but what oftentimes when that happens, there are security checks, security debt that is incurred that is not always noted or revisited probably quite as rigorously as it should be, just because we get back to business and focus on what's in front of us and not go back. But that's some of the things that we need to do as a result of that.
Appreciate the answer there, Rod. Can we pivot a little bit here and address the topic of risk management for the software as a service industry? We see a totally changed world, whether we're talking about labor, inflation, supply chain, and the ability to quantify risk across the SaaS landscape is exponentially more difficult now and time-consuming than previously was the case.
As you state, and frankly, just as you ran through that rapid list there, honestly, it makes me a little dizzy to look at all those things where they reside in our world and try to map the cascading impacts across those. Well, that's largely what we need to do. So going back to the expedited adoption of SaaS services, a lot now as we do that more and more, a lot of organizations have quite a bit of their business operations outside their quote unquote the theoretical four walls of their organization. And we often, I think what we'll probably see more and more in this is, some blind spots that, only probably only the most mature organizations will engage those providers. And as much as everybody likes doing security checklist and all those things, we probably don't do, aren't aware, don't have the visibility into some of those or a lot of those services that we should get, or that would be able to help us get the visibility to make those risk decisions and see how things function. So I think over time we've seen a couple of examples where we've had outages in one region of a particular cloud provider. But when you have, in organizations, we can plan like, okay, we'll have, one, region A is our primary region B, or we, somehow load balance our services across those. That's a challenge, honestly, when you're looking at it within, your own organization. But then when you take in those SaaS providers that are all doing the same thing and most likely not in concert with, what you're doing, I think those create some blind spots. And I think that as time goes on, we'll probably, either find ways to address that, or we'll have a couple within the industry. I'm not saying, a particular company, but society will experience that in one way or another, and then we will respond to that and work to put controls in place to make that happen more. I think some of the other things that come to mind is we have external communication partners, like certainly Microsoft Teams was one of the platforms, Zoom, all those had mass adoption through COVID, and now we see the need for those having very robust services as well. I think we can get into even getting into service contracts and as we move forward, probably those types of things, or the security questionnaires maybe haven't addressed that because they're a little bit more focused on security or something else, but we will get to that level. There's also the security bill of materials, SBOMs as they're being called, of what comes through your supply chain that could potentially disrupt your environment from a software perspective, and a lot of good work being done there as well. So just giving us more visibility into what's happening, and a lot more efforts in that area.
Well, we have time for one more question, and it's of a personal nature, Rod. When you're not focused on cybersecurity, what activities do you enjoy?
Living in Minnesota gives us a lot of variety. Summers are filled with mountain biking, trips to the lake, trips up to the North Shore of Lake Superior, and just enjoying nature there. Some of our favorite activities. Fall time, it's apple orchards and things like that. And now in the quote unquote dead of winter, getting into cross country skiing, skate skiing, and some of those other activities where no matter where you are, what time it is, you have things that you can go and do just to make life interesting, to push the boundaries, I think, on things that you have never done before, or the kids have never done before, places we've never done, exploration, constant learning and exploring. So that's a lot of fun, a lot of variety here, and that's about it for that realm.
Speaking of realms, you're about to appear on the #1 podcast in hospitality, No Vacancy Live, with Glenn Houseman and Anthony Melcury. And for our listeners' benefit, Rod, what date is that?
That is Wednesday, February 8th. I think it's February 8th, but I believe it's a Wednesday.
Now, I recently appeared on the show with Glenn and Anthony, and they call themselves the Odd Couple, and they're the Batman and Robin of hospitality podcasting, for sure. And of course, Anthony Melcury was our keynote speaker at our very successful 20th anniversary customer conference at the Four Seasons in Fort Lauderdale last year. And we're looking forward, actually, to releasing that keynote over YouTube, over LinkedIn, for all of our listeners' benefit. But Rod, can I ask, what is some of the subject matter you'll be discussing with Glenn and Anthony on your podcast with them on No Vacancy Live on February the 8th?
Obviously, a couple of the topics we've mentioned here, specific to hospitality. I think, when it comes to, obviously, my focus, as I said of late, is identity and access management. And as more and more things are being digitized or transformed digitally, that means more security, more access on smartphones, smart devices, access to rooms, and different things like that. And talking about the security around that, the different considerations, what we can anticipate of how those things might be misused, etc. So really looking forward to it. It's going to be an exciting, really exciting talk for me.
Oh, I have no doubt that it will be. It will have some definite laughter or rib ticklers sprinkled throughout, as only they can provide. So remember that, listeners. Rod Kaleho will be with Glenn Houseman and Anthony Melcury on February the 8th on No Vacancy Live, and you can catch that on No Vacancy on LinkedIn. You've been listening to seasoned cybersecurity executive Rod Kaleho sharing his thoughts on business continuity planning and risk management and all things cybersecurity for the hospitality industry. Thanks for joining us today, Rod.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
To learn more about BirchStreet Systems as we scale beyond our 20th anniversary into 2023, visit our website at BirchStreetSystems.com. That's all the time we have for today's show. Join us next time right here on Buy It on Birch Street.